people and 90 of them agree on something, they don't need their rights protected on that issue, right? Because they all agree. It's the 4 or 5 lunatics that may have something creative and new to add to the discussion, without which you can't have democracy and without which this principle, won't flourish. And I hate to mention it, but it's not different than Chairman Mao's principle. Let 1,000 schools of thought contend, let 1,000 flowers bloom. I mean, the idea is that even the most wacko ideas in a free society get heard. And that's a deeply American principle, too. I mean, Thoreau argued that anyone that was more right than his neighbors was a majority of one already. The truth is not majoritarian. True things are true for the simple and tautological reason that they're true. And votes don't count. George Bush can get 98% votes, and it don't mean he's right or that he's telling the truth. It won't mean that. Because truth, you just don't vote on it. You don't vote. It's not a voting matter. True things are true because they're true, not because people believe them, even if overwhelming numbers believe them. Okay, that's all on Mill for now. Mill's account of freedom has become very famous, and it's had a very salutary impact in political theory, but it has a profound limitation. And this has been pointed out by Sir Isaiah Berlin and others. It is an account of what Berlin calls negative freedom only. In other words, it is an account of freedom from constraint. But it has nothing to say about this incredibly important dimension of freedom. Freedom to or enabling freedom. See, there's a difference between freedom from constraint and freedom to. Well, the first one, freedom from, is negative freedom. The second, freedom to, is positive. You can take those as value-neutral words. I mean, Berlin did. There are two different traditions of talking about liberty. Freedom to, enabling freedom, is best introduced, and I'll hold up another book. A good discussion of it is in Marx's Economic and Philosophic Manuscripts, but Voltaire and others have discussed positive freedom. So it's not just Marx, but other people too, and I intend to. The need for a concept of positive freedom not to overcome Mill's important principle, but to supplement it, seems to me obvious. Because here is a dimension of freedom that Mill's argument won't handle. It's summed up in the famous French joke. The rich and the poor are equally free to sleep under the bridges at night. One suspects such a concept of freedom is very poverty-stricken. I do. I think that's a very thin notion. Like I think the notion of volunteer is a very thin notion. McDonald's, jail, high percentages in both. Drugs in the street, the army, volunteer. Very thin notion of volunteer. Freedom, to mean something, has to have a positive component. A component that enables you to exercise your rights. The right of free speech is no good if you haven't been enabled by education to talk well and to speak and find a place to speak. The right to travel freely is no good if you don't have a car. And even simple rights, like the right to survive. Forget pursue happiness, just to survive. That right, which ought to be a right. By ought, I'm appealing to Kantian insights, which ought to be a right. Even that right can't be secured if you don't have enough money for a hamburger, at least, or a Baby Ruth, or whatever. So clearly there's a need for a principle of positive freedom that enables people to do something. Let me make the distinction clear again. As far as I know, there are no laws or juridical rules that constrain me from owning Mobil Oil, being best friends with Mel Gibson, or dating Kathleen Turner. However, I'm missing some of the enabling conditions. I ain't got enough money to buy the oil. I'm a little too short and fat, you know, to be a friend of Mel's, and Kathleen Turner's out of the question. But the point is very important, and especially important to remember if we're going to bandy this word democracy and freedom, these words around. Because you can't have a free society that doesn't have positive freedoms for people, that doesn't enable them to exercise their freedoms. It has to be more a thicker notion. Now, the debate would come on how thick does the notion have to be, you know. Well, for Marx, as you know, infamously, and he's supposed to be dead wrong, it's supposed to be so thick that from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. Which is a principle, as you may have noticed, that people that work for the Bechtel Corporation observe among each other. Seriously. I mean, I hate to sound like a commie, but the ruling class treat each other like good socialist buddies. They don't much let each other get in trouble, back each other up. They don't let each other go broke. Continental Bank can't go broke, but you can. Bankruptcy courts are filled with folks, but not, you know. So they seem to have, there's kind of a socialism there. It's almost a brotherhood, where brotherhood's really not a sexist word, it's the right word because it's descriptive. It's kind of a brotherhood. Well, a whole civil society in which people aided one another in that way would be great if voluntary. This was, of course, going to be one of Reagan's ideas, a great thing. We'll have everybody do it with a telethon or something. I always use telethon as a kind of a joke. You know? Poor people, have a telethon. I mean, it's a Hollywood solution. Okay. Now, to a third, actually, I haven't discussed in detail Marx's theory of freedom, but it grows, or his view of freedom, because he doesn't really, he's not a philosopher, he doesn't really have a view of it. He has a critique of the other view, of the negative one. Hegel has a fuller view, and I'm going to mention his view very quickly. For Hegel, freedom is more like a placeholder word. Let me try to explain what I mean by that. For Hegel, freedom is so important that it is the meaning and the point of human history in general. That if one asks about the Bible quickly, what's it about? Someone will go, the devil did it, right? And that's a quick account of the plot. Then if you ask Hegel quickly about history, he'll go, it's about how freedom wins. Hegel's account of freedom is more sophisticated in a way than any I've given you up till now because it is deeply historical. Here's what I mean by that. In any given historical epoch, Hegel says, show me the obstacles that human beings saw in their path to realizing their concrete goals, and the overcoming of those obstacles will receive the name freedom. Now, the nice thing about that concept of freedom is it is a free concept of it, which means it allows each generation to pursue freedom's goals, maybe reformulating them anew. All I've done is backtrack to the 19th century, positive versus negative freedom, tried to do that. But the Hegelian concept is historical and reminds us that when we formulate these goals, you know, they are the work of each new group that comes along in the struggle for freedom. For Hegel, freedom